to make our cloth covered boards. Now these boards are covered completely around 5 of the 6 sides with the cloth. Now we're going to be working on to our finished boards. What we need are our boards, again binder's board that are the same size as the finished page. We need some book cloth. Book cloth again is a cloth that's been lined or filled with a starch or a paper in order to keep the glue from going through. We need some waste paper, and then we need our adhesive. And I like to keep my adhesive in these rubber tubs so that I can use them with a brush. I think brushing is the best way of applying this and getting a nice even coat. I also have some waste paper here to glue on, and I think that'll do it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get one board and one piece of cloth and one piece of waste paper. Again, I like to have my waste paper larger on all 4 sides than the book cloth. I want to make sure that my book cloth is at least 1 inch taller and wider than my board. This one's a little bit extra big, but that's fine. I'm going to make sure that the grain's going the right direction on my board and that's generally centered. If I want to, I can go ahead and I can draw some pencil lines just to give me a guide, but I think I don't need them today. So again, we want to make sure that we're working with the correct size, that paperback side. I'm going to be working with my liquid adhesive, my PVA. I'm brushing with a 1 inch wide artist brush. It's a synthetic bristle brush, but it'll hold the glue fairly well. Now when I'm gluing, I like to really dab that brush in there. I want to get that really full of glue. The more you can dip down, the more glue you can get in between those bristles, the less likely you have to go back time and time again, and that's just going to make our lives easier. I'm going to dab a little bit of the excess off the sides, just so it doesn't drip, but it still has plenty of glue sitting in there. I'm going to start from the middle and I'm going to start brushing out. Now I always hold on to the bottom third and then brush in kind of a starburst pattern, getting that glue all across the cloth. This waste paper is really going to come in handy when we're working with the PVA. I want to make sure I have enough glue that it remains wet until I'm done with it, but not so much that it kind of squeezes and gets everywhere. Okay, so I've got that starburst pattern. I have a nice even coat so I can see the glue. It's white when it's wet, so that helps us a little bit. I'm going to hold on to that 2/3 with my fingertips, and I'm going to glue out that final third. And I'm going to make sure I get as much glue in my brush without being sloppy as I can, just to save going back and forth. So I have a nice even coat. I don't see huge puddles. I can take care of those fingernail marks from holding it down, but that's looking pretty good. So a nice even flat layer. If I have too much glue on my brush or on my thing, I can brush it onto the waste paper and make sure it's nice and even. So I'm going to put this aside and I'm going to pull off the wet book cloth. If I get any glue on my cutting mat or my table, I'm just going to rub it down to get rid of it. It's also handy to use an apron at this time, because then you can just wipe your hands off and you're ready to go again. So I have my glued out piece of book cloth. I have my board. I'm just going to center it and press it for a minute or two. PVA works best if you let it dry over time, so air dry, and if you use pressure. So if you use a little pressure, you should be able to get that down. Now that it's set in place, I need to think about trimming down the excess. So I want to trim all 4 sides down to about 3/4 of an inch. So I'm just going to make some marks on all 4 sides that are 3/4 of an inch from the edge of the board. Now you may be thinking to yourself, why didn't you just cut it to size ahead of time? And I think this is a much more accurate measurement, and I don't have to be as careful as I lay it down and I get it set in place. Sometimes we need to trim these down ahead of time, but in general, I find it easier to do it this way. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my scalpel and my ruler, and I'm going to lay down my ruler on those lines. I have the metal side down. PVA might get on my ruler, but it's easy enough to peel that off afterwards. So I have extra. I can just peel that off. Again, get it off the table surface. Trim it around. I do the short ends first and then the long ends, primarily out of habit, and because my ruler's not long enough to reach at first. And then I turn it around and I do my last side. There we go. Okay, so now I have that trimmed to size, so that's good. Get that ruler out of the way to let it dry. Wipe off my hands. Now, it's ideal to try and work through this process fairly quickly, but if it takes a little bit of time, we can re-glue areas. Okay, so we have our board glued to our cloth. We have our 3/4 inch turn-in, or edges, trimmed off. Now we have a bit of a dilemma to deal with. So we have this corner material. This is going to get turned in. This can get turned in, but we have kind of a whole lot of bulk and extra material there that we don't want. So what we need to do is we need to do some trimming to make a nicer finished edge. Now we want to make a 45-degree angle cut on that corner. So again, 45 degrees compared to the cut edges. And we want to think about how far away we want that cut to be. I want to make sure that we have a cut that's 1.5 board thicknesses away. Sometimes easier said than done, but if I have a scrap of board and place it down, and then I put my board on that first line, so I know that this place right here, in between those two lines, is about 1.5 board thicknesses. Now you can go ahead and if you have some scrap board, you can use it to measure that out. Sometimes people will bring the corner up, kind of mark it and try to figure out from there. It's fine if it's too big, but usually it's a bit of an issue if it's too small, because then the interior board pokes out. I usually just use my scissors and we'll kind of eyeball it again, aiming for that 1.5 board thicknesses. There we go. If I want to, I could always glue it down on another corner and use that as a measuring device. Usually what I do is I just do it by eye. So again, we're doing all 4 corners. Okay. So I have 4 corners trimmed off. My glue is starting to tack up a bit, so I'll probably re-glue, and then I'll be ready to go. So we have our cover. We now have some waste paper again. We're going to get our glue pot out. We're going to glue up again. If I'm fast enough, I do this as one operation. If I'm not as fast, then this is perfectly fine. Turn my waste paper around. Okay. So work off any excess, but we want that nice even coating. Okay. So I'm going to pull it off the waste paper. There we go. Now we need to do our turn-ins, as I said. We're going to take our bone folder, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to just lift that cloth up. I'm going to hold the bore nice and tight and try and lift that or fold that cloth up so it's nice and tight against the edge of the board. And then what I can do is just use my fingers to fold it down. I always start with the head and the tail. That's the top and the bottom of the book, because that's kind of reduces a wear point as books are being shelved. So again, I've just folded that up. I've held the board down, and then I'm just gonna fold and push. If I get a little glue on myself, I'll just wipe it off. Nice and tight. Now my goal is really not to have any air bubbles on the edge of the board, and that it's nice and tight. So you may notice that as we turned our edges in, it made this little pocket right on the corner. And we don't want that loose pocket. So what we need to do is we need to fold them down or finish them off. I like to use the round edge of my bone folder to do that. I'm just going to start on the outside, parallel with the edge of the board, and I'm just going to pinch it down. And what that does is it closes up that opening and it angles that in a little bit. So again, same on this side, right on the edge, fold it down. Once I've got those closed up, then I can just bring this cloth around, finish it off. Here we go. So I'm particularly looking at the corners, making sure they're not bowing out or poking out too much. I'm making sure there's no air bubbles and that my cloth is down. Now I can do the same with the other side. So again, roll them closed. Roll them closed. If I get glue on my bone folder, I just wipe it off. Fold it up and over. Just going to pull it a little bit tight using my fingers, and then my bone folder to lay it down nice and flat. If I need to shape it, if it's bowing out a little bit too much, I can kind of bang it and adjust things a little bit. So there we have the inside of our wrapped board, and here we have the outside. So we're just going to do this again with the next one, and then we'll be able to attach the pages to the boards.